can. It's 6 o'clock when we get here, Dave. I'll catch you when you come back in. I'll catch you when you come back in. Order, please. We've reached the moment of interruption. The subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Dartmouth East. Honourable member for Halifax Atlantic
is going to take over from. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to speak on behalf of the member for Dartmouth East. I'm very pleased to speak to this resolution because I had a phone call about 6 weeks ago from a woman who said she needed help. She needed $60,000 by the next morning. And I sort of said, I don't think I can do that. She said, all right, I'm going to have to tell the staff tonight that they better go home, and the daycare center is closed. That's it, full stop. And I thought, goodness gracious, that was an interesting phone call, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do about that. A little bit more of the story unraveled, however. And what it emerged was that the Riverview Children's Center in my constituency, established in 1973, licensed for 88 children with 81 allocated subsidized spaces in Spryfield, near to the subsidized housing district of the Greystone, has actually the highest percentage of allocated subsidized places for children's care in Nova Scotia. At the time when fire went and then flood went through the building, there was an enrollment of 67. The school moved, and under the auspices of Department of Community Services, again, received stabilization funding and wage subsidy grants. And although the board of directors was supposed to be composed of 9 people, it was on the registry of joint stocks with only 4, one of whom was the executive director as a member of the board of directors. The center ran into financial difficulties, and 67 families were left without childcare arrangements for the following day. A lot of the people, in fact, almost all of the people who had children in that center were depending on those spaces to allow them to go to work. I have been trying since then to persuade the Department of Community Services to restore the allocated subsidized, we, and a working group has been working to attempt to persuade the Department of Community Services to restore funding, less than $60,000, I might add, to the center. Now, the Early Childhood Development Initiative, which is a joint federal-provincial agreement signed 2 years ago, I believe, allocated some $1.8 million in funding for regulated daycare spaces. And by the time the Riverview closed, $1.4 million of that funding had been spent. The remaining $0.4 million would serve to add 50 cents per day per child to the provincial subsidy rates. Now, an interesting thing is that in the meantime, some portable subsidized spaces have been created. Those portable spaces allow a parent to have their child move from one for-profit daycare center to another throughout their entire the years during which they must legally be cared for when the parents are not at home. In other words, until 12 years old. 50 cents more a day to what is already the lowest per diem rate in the country, what has remained unchanged since 1998, $14.98 a day. That's out of the sum $28 a day, which it's estimated it costs to provide care for a child in Nova Scotia. As I say, 50 portable spaces have been created in that time. There have been no new allocated subsidized spaces. There is only the one daycare in Spryfield. Transportation is a problem. I've spoken to a woman who travels to Burnside from Harrietsfield every day. She gets up at about 6 in the morning to get on the bus to go to Burnside and back. And when allocated funding disappeared, she was without an available space. Most of the people who I have met with since then, have had their children with me, and they're desperate to see this particular centre restored. It's very interesting because they believe very firmly that this is the heart of their community, and that if portable spaces replace the fixed spaces, children will begin to drift following the rather marginal kinds of employment that may be available from place to place, and that the community heart will have disappeared, which is the early childhood centre. In Nova Scotia, 80% of children whose parents are working are in unlicensed or informal arrangements. People are finding care. And in these cases, people are finding care frequently with the custodian's grandmother, other people's grandmothers. We have one of the highest labor force participation rates for women of any country. Only in the Scandinavian countries are they higher. But there are no seasonal or 24-hour or fixed emergency care services. And the more that children move from space to space, commercial space, I might add, the less likely it is that there is continuity there. I would like to say that one of the most important aspects of this decision, it seems to be, is that the funding, that what the government ends up allocating in funding to portable spaces is $4 less per day than it is to allocated subsidized spaces. Multiply that by the number of children who are cared for in allocated subsidized spaces, and you can see a very tidy governmental savings. It says it all. There are 367 centres in Nova Scotia in 2001, and out of those, less than half are non-profit. As the number of commercial centres increases, or may increase, which are funded primarily by, entirely by parents with only a subsidy that contributes, it becomes more and more difficult for parents with less lucrative jobs to find care. And as I say, in certain geographic areas, it can be a real stranglehold on employment. In the case of the Riverview, they are still, the 67 families, or most of those 67 families, are still attempting to have funding restored to their centre. They're anxious not to take those spaces with them and find another commercial centre. They are working very, very hard on programming. The local schools are supporting it. And once again, you have a huge amount of community will and investment in a centre, which is guaranteed to be supporting, or to at least be filled partly with children who receive these subsidies. The other thing that I'd like to say about all of this is that throughout there seems to have been an abysmal lack of support or supervision by community services, family and child services. I've noted that the budgets appear to have been underspent considerably in family and child services during the last couple of years. And I would really have hoped that some of that could have gone to giving guidance to the board of this nonprofit centre. These are centres, and this is not the only such centre, run by parents who do not have a great deal of experience with the mechanics of working a board of directors, and yet they have received no guidance whatsoever. To me, Mr. Speaker, it seems like giving a full tank of gas and a set of keys and a very powerful vehicle to somebody who has never received training of any kind, who has never been tested for a driver's license. You sign you pay your $35 to the Registry of Joint Stocks, you are incorporated, and you go. And the people of the Riverview Daycare, who are working so very hard to see those allocated spaces remain in their community, are terrified by the liabilities they've taken on without understanding, by joining the board of directors, and yet they are still determined to put their hearts, souls, and energy into ensuring that those places remain in their community and that there is a continuity. So, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that this government will not continue to save money on the backs of an entire community, saying it's cheaper not to support the centre, but only the individuals. Thank you. I think that's the end of my
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I was a little surprised by the NDP resolution that came forward tonight, and I'd like to start by pointing out that I had prepared to respond to the resolution, which was a more global sense than something that was specific to a centre. So as it pertains to the specific centre, that being Riverview, I would concur that there is a problem in terms of the management of the centre. The honourable member indicated that there was only 4 on the board and that 1 was the executive director. And indeed, as soon as we became aware that there was a problem, we were in there with staff trying to assist the parents and making other arrangements, and we have worked with them through this, and we'll continue to work with them. But indeed, there are management problems there, and I would point out that one of the concerns is, even though they were all subsidized childcare spaces, and there were even the $2.25, much of which might have been made available directly to the parents, was still outstanding, and that indeed caused a problem in terms of the cash flow. And I'm not sure if the honourable member is aware of that, but that was part of the problem. So regardless of whether a centre is a non-profit centre or a commercial centre, both providing excellent care, there is a certain expectation in the relationship between the centre and the parents to work together to continue the centre. The NDP resolution actually was, therefore it be resolved that this government continued to fund allocated subsidized daycare seats and not transfer these existing spaces into portable ones. And I also found that a little peculiar, Mr. Speaker, because I have actually met 3 times with the non-profit daycare center directors, and the non-profits are the ones that historically had the subsidized seats, and the only ones that have assigned subsidized seats are to the non-profit centers. And in the meeting I had with them on December the 11th, 2 things came out of it. One was they expressed their concern about maintaining these seats, which is what it says here, and I told them that as long as the seats were being utilized by families in the area, in other words, they were not vacant, and there was a vacancy problem with regards to Riverside and with Woodside, and that was part of the reason why they were not generating enough cash flow, enough revenue to stay open. But as long as they were making use of the seats, that I would, in essence, grandfather them so long as I was minister. So to have this come forward as a resolution sort of surprises me from the NDP, because I'd already addressed the director's concerns. Secondly, I would like to point out that the whole sector expressed a concern about the way that we allocate the subsidies. And Mr. Speaker, I seem to be getting some attention from the member from Halifax, Needham, out there. She perhaps is learning something today about the workings of the child care system. Anyways, the point of this, Mr. Speaker, is that the subsidy review was actually requested by the sector, and we've undertaken this. And as a result of the subsidy review, we're looking forward for some recommendations as to how we might better allocate those monies that do go into the subsidized child care seats. So I'm sure that the member opposite, the member for Halifax Atlantic, will be pleased to know that, in fact, partly at the encouragement of the sector, in fact, a great deal to the encouragement of the sector, we moved ahead with this so that we make sure that we're investing these early childhood development dollars and provincial dollars in as prudent manner as possible, never losing sight of the fact that those that we're trying to serve are the children and their families. And there is one anomaly here with these allocated subsidized childcare seats, is that in fact becomes part of the business plan of the nonprofit center. And I acknowledge that to them, that I recognize that their planning depended on that future income, and that is why I felt that it was appropriate to grandfather those seats so long as they were making use of them. But anyways, the child care subsidy program is a tremendous support for low-income Nova Scotians, and these subsidies help low-income parents cover the cost of child care, whether it's to allow them to go to work or to just to go to school to advance their careers, or indeed to provide some respite care, which is also necessary. The program has grown with the addition of newly subsidized seats and funding increases. And I would just like to correct the member opposite in terms of the announcement of more seats. The last announcement of new seats was, in fact, well before the problems with these two centers arose, and she was referring to one of them. I did commit back in a meeting last month that there would be an increase of some $400,000 into the amount of the per diem paid to subsidized child care seats, and it worked out to about 50 cents a day at the time, with the caveat that if there was more federal monies that came down, I'd be prepared to augment that to the tune of another $900,000, which brings it in line with what was recommended by the Beach Report. So anyways, Mr. Speaker, I felt that that should have been good news to the nonprofit centers in particular, since they had by far and away the vast majority of the subsidized seats, because on December the 11th, they had indicated to me that if even there was a 10-cent increase, they would recognize it as a sign of good faith. So one would think that 50 cents, and now indeed it's going to be more than 50 cents, would be well welcomed by the sector. As these subsidies are intended to support parents and their children, it is critical that they be accessible to those that need the most. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you time and time again, of the 2,706 subsidized seats that we have in the province, the 280 that are portable, I am reminded by parents and by professionals that putting the child first, in other words, worrying about addressing those children in greatest need, regardless of where they may live, should be our focus. And what we're talking about is the portable subsidized seats here, and this is something that has been recommended to us, and we've adopted that recommendation, and in future, any additional seats that are announced by our department, you can expect them to be of the portable variety, where the subsidy follows the child, so that we're always putting the child first as opposed to the center. That's not to diminish the contributions of the various centers, whether they be nonprofit or commercial, but it's important not to forget those that we are here to serve, and that is the children of this province, the children in greatest need of child care and their families. Also, with the provision of the portable seats, it means that children can acquire childcare in areas where otherwise there might not be childcare because there's no nonprofit centers, as long as the commercial center has signed an agreement with the department. Mr. Speaker, I know that time is drawing to a close for me here, but I do want to say that in terms of the early childhood development monies, back in May of 2001, there was a vision paper that was put out. It's called Our Children, Today's Investment, Tomorrow's Promise, and that very clearly lays out what we envision should be done with the early childhood development monies. And we are following that plan, Mr. Speaker. That plan recognized the sustainability of the centers, and particularly the significant pressure that wages have on their operation. Typically about 85% of their costs are wages. And in fact, the first thing that was done, Mr. Speaker, was $4,000 per full-time child care worker was put in place as a subsidy. Mr. Speaker, I think that that speaks to this commitment, and in this case, working with the federal government's commitment to work with the provinces and the territories to stabilize the child care sector, and we're pleased to be partners with them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and speak on this particular resolution. And for the benefit of all members of the House, I think it's befitting that we read this resolution loudly. Therefore, be it resolved that this government continue to fund allocated subsidized daycare seats and not transfer these existing spaces into portable ones. Mr. Speaker, as I listened to the comments of the presenter of this particular resolution, and indeed the comments from the minister, I was somewhat taken that the minister chose not to address the essence of the resolution, but rather than to localize his comments in a way that was almost a bit of an attack on the member for standing up for her constituents. And I thought that was a little bit disappointing. She has a constituency situation, a subsidized daycare center with problems. That was quite apparent from the dissertation. And the minister, rather than addressing some of the structural problems there, whether it's a lack of competency, whether it's a lack of professional experience, whether it's a mismanagement of financial affairs, whether it's the fact that the government has turned a blind eye to some of the difficulties with this particular center, I'm not sure. But we obviously have two philosophies here. One, in preference to subsidized daycare, and another one that allows for some portability with subsidized daycare in a fixed location, and obviously the other one, which with portability, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, is clearly outlined in the government's Blue Book from 1999, where it says, during its first mandate, a PC government will ensure that daycare subsidies are portable and that they are attached to the child and not to the facility. Now, the question to ask is, what success has the minister and his government had on this particular issue? If I understand what he's saying, he's had no success. Because of difficulties in subsidized daycare centers, he's now going to use that as an opportunity to purge rather than to address what is an obvious problem in the province of Nova Scotia. There is a 4-year backlog for portable spaces. And what did he choose to do? Attack. Attack and divert attention away from the real issue. Mr. Speaker, there's no secret that if you look at all the provincial jurisdictions across Canada, most are moving towards portability. But that doesn't mean to say that Nova Scotia has to be measured according to all other provinces. I agree that there are cases where portability is a must. Because, yes, the subsidization is cheaper for the government on portable spaces, but it certainly affords individual parents the ability, particularly if they live 20 or 30 miles from home, from a daycare center, and they're working. It's very difficult if a daycare center, for example, closes nearby them, that's subsidized, and they have no alternative. They have no alternative. They move, and they'll put it in a portable situation. If something happens there, then they as parents will make the decision of what's best for their child. The minister has indicated how benevolent he has been by offering 50 cents. 50 cents per space, additional. Now, and he uses the comparative analogy that, well, it's a lot better than 10 cents. Now, I don't know where this minister is living when he goes outside the legislature, but it's not in the real world. Whether it's subsidized or not subsidized, that wouldn't even buy you a half a cup of coffee, let alone try and feed a child. Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's fair for the government to try and pit the private, the profit, and the not-for-profit institutions against each other. And it seems to me, if I'm reading between the lines, there's a philosophical problem within his department at the senior bureaucratic level, because it's almost as if he's taking advice, going one direction for a considerable amount of time. Difficulties arise with 2 subsidized daycare centers, and all of a sudden, he's off in a different direction. I believe he owes it to all stakeholders to state quite clearly. Is the intent of his government to move to full portable daycare center activity in this province? He hasn't done that. Is he going to maintain that 50-50 equation? See, what's happening here in Metro is unique to many of the daycare centers, even the not-for-profit ones outside of Metro. For the most part, those outside of Metro, they have to be portable. And indeed, to a certain extent, those in Metro, there has to be some portability. Because, and the minister, I will give him credit here, he's right. The issue is one of focus for the child, not for creating employment or a business, whether it be profit or not for profit. We have to be mindful what it's for, Mr. Speaker. And I think given the difficulties that's transpired, the difficulties that's transpired with these 2 daycare centers, and I think that may be the tip of the iceberg. There could be others. 3. It was 2 when I started my dissertation. Now it's up to 3. So the minister's got a lot of work ahead of him. And maybe by the end of the day, it might be 4. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that there should be that type of polarization between the not-for-profit and those that are for a profit. I don't think, I truly believe there's enough room in this province to accommodate both interests. Because when you're in an urban core, for the most part, you have concentrated numbers of families that need that type of financial support from the Department of Community Services. And that's not to suggest that they don't need it outside of Metro either. But outside of Metro, they have to travel further, greater distances. So there has to be a certain degree of stability and fixing of these centers. But the government, and the minister in particular, has to be a little more clear on what his objective is, because he's saying 2 things. He's saying, as a part of the Tory government, one thing in his blue book, and he's telling the legislature something different. Now, which is it? And how far is he going to go? And that $1.8 million, it's gone. It's gone. So what are they going to do now? Now that 50 cents is gone, spent. Is he going to remind us that perhaps he'll take some of the money that he's allocating for skipping ropes and put that towards the daycare centers? There's such confusion. It's almost like it's complete gobbledygook that's coming from across. There's such a lack of clarity on this whole policy. Well, it's not even as good as fiction, because fiction is enjoyable, Mr. Speaker. A good fiction novel you can enjoy, but we can't even find out what this minister is talking about half the time. So, Mr. Speaker, I would expect on a future day that the minister would come and speak to the resolution and not be making direct attacks on members that are trying to represent their constituents.
Thank you. Time allotted for late debate has expired. I'd like to thank all members for taking part in the debate this evening, and we'll resume back into Committee of the Whole House and Supply.
The Honourable House Leader. Health. The estimates for the Minister of Health. I'll recognize the Honourable Member from Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to continue on a new line of questioning. I see that the responsible officials for the Department of Health are not yet in their seats. The Minister of Health is giving me the signal that it's okay to proceed. Thank you for that. Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn my attention to the question of people with disabilities. And in particular, the Minister will recall that in the fall session of past, the issue of people and children in particular suffering or being challenged with autism was an issue squarely before this House during question period. And many people have written to the Minister urging him to ensure that there is funding consistent with the funding that exists in most other Canadian provinces for ABA therapy. My question for the Minister of Health is whether or not in this budget he has found the resources to ensure that ABA therapy will be available for people who are challenged with autism.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
I want to thank the honourable member, Mr. Chairman, for his question, and the subject matter to which he refers, the resources for children with autism, is indeed a challenge for us with respect to funding. We have continued the $2 million that was in previous budgets. That continues to be available in this budget with respect to the expenditure. We have developed there is a plan which has been brought forward. Sum of money has been identified with respect to the implementation of that plan. To date, we have not identified the funds for that implementation.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear on the response by the Minister. Is there or is there not new funding available for the Applied Behavioural Analysis Program?
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
As I thought I had answered the question previously, but the short answer is no.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Minister. It is clear now. The surgery list wait times is the next subject that I'd like to turn my attention to. Minister, you will recall that there are some areas or some disciplines in medicine who approach the issue of surgery wait times differently than others. And I think it was cardiac or cardiovascular, one or the other, surgeons in this province who established a common wait pool for their patients to ensure that the worst patients, the patients who needed surgery the most, went first out of that common pool. As a consequence, the wait times in that discipline were substantially reduced. At that time, it was the only area of surgery that did that, and it was the only area of surgery that was showing real success. My question is whether or not there is any plan in the Department of Health to ensure that wait times, this common pooling of wait times is imposed across all disciplines, so that, for example, patients don't simply pick their favorite or most popular orthopedic surgeon, but they go into a common pool and accept the surgeon who ultimately provides them with the surgery at the end of the day.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the member for the question. Really, what we do want our patients to know is the information relative to wait times. The chair of the committee was with me on the weekend at a wonderful event in New Glasgow. Hip Hip Hooray, it was referred to, and it was the first of what they hope will be an annual event at New Glasgow, and it was a symbolic walk that celebrated the newfound freedom and ease of movement that those who have been afflicted with arthritis who had the benefit of orthopedic surgery. And I can tell you, Mr. Chairman and the honourable member through you, that that was a very moving experience. And for the surgeons that were involved with the patients that were there, you could see for them the tremendous level of satisfaction that they had as a result of their work being so visual to them. The last time they would perhaps see those patients would be, or they would see the patients only within the context of their hospital bed, and then afterwards the follow-up visits in their offices, and didn't have a full appreciation of the capacity that they have been able to give to these patients as a result of that. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to note that, because it was a wonderful event, and the honourable member, had he had the opportunity to be there, would have been moved in the same manner that we were relative to this major achievement in the lives of these people, and the expressions on the faces of the surgeons and the nurses that were involved in this was equally telling. It was a wonderful celebration, and it brings us to the point, and I focus on that because in Pictou, at the Aberdeen Hospital, there is an excellent orthopedic program. And the challenge we have is in the 4 sites that exist throughout the province is to ensure that patients have the kind of information that they require so that they can make decisions as to where it is that they want to go to receive those services. I'm not certain that we're going to be in a situation where we dictate to individuals where they go to receive services. Certainly the challenge is to make sure that the information is made available to them so that they can make their own decisions. And that is part and parcel of the work of the Wait Time Committee that is currently working in the province. And they're developing standards so that the wait times are clearly understood by people, and we know precisely what is meant by a wait time of a certain period of time. And that means the same thing for the surgeon as it does for the GP, as it does for the patient, as it does for the diagnosticians, so that everybody, and the family, so that everybody in the piece will understand what is meant by the wait time numbers that are presented.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Yes, the point that I was making, Mr. Chair, is that in some fields of medicine, we've had success. And while it may not be the first step for the department to dictate to orthopedic surgeons, I think that there's some persuasion that would be of benefit in these circumstances, given the very positive results that they've received in other areas. Which brings me to the next line of questioning. It relates to alternative funding. Many health practitioners, particularly those in primary health care, community health care centers and clinics, signal unequivocally that the funding for physicians drives the costs in the healthcare system. And if we were to move more to a team approach, in other words, if we moved more towards alternative funding, then the cost, the health of the population would be improved, that the costs would be reduced, and overall there would be greater efficiencies. Now, I realize that alternative funding has been something that has been gradually growing over some period of time, but there are some, and I'm quickly moving to that place myself, quite frankly, Mr. Chair, who believe that if we moved holus bolus to the alternative funding approach, then costs would improve across the board, and most importantly, the health of our population would be improved because there's a much greater level of cooperation amongst all the stakeholders in the healthcare system, because they are working together with the patient at the center of the problem-solving exercise. And I'm asking whether or not the minister or the department have any clear intentions to drive the issue of alternative funding more aggressively than it has been driven up until now.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the honourable member for the question. And what I can tell him is that we have indeed made some progress with respect to the issues of alternate funding programs, especially in the areas that center around the academic role of physicians that are here in the Capital District. Now, we are also, as part of the primary health care initiatives within the province, we have a primary health care steering committee. And that committee has brought together broader stakeholders relative to the whole issue of provision of primary health care. And a subcommittee of that group is looking at methods of payment of family physicians. And is really would be a variety of the medical society is a part of that activity, and they support it. And I can confirm with the honourable member, I don't mean to consume his time, but I want to demonstrate to him how important I think the subject is. The story of the mother who took her teenage daughter to the doctor, and this doctor was on an alternate funding program. The young girl was in with the doctor for what appeared to be a very long period of time. And the mother became extremely concerned that something serious was wrong with her daughter. When the doctor and the daughter emerged, and the mother appeared quite concerned, and the doctor was able to respond to her, "Oh no, we had a wonderful chat, and your daughter is going from junior high to high school." And the daughter eventually told the mother that the doctor took the time to discuss with her the many challenges that she would be facing as a person going from junior high to senior high, and spent time discussing the issues related to peer pressure and, you know, from a medical perspective, but also as somebody who was a caring individual who knew this child from her early days right to this stage in her life. That conversation would not have been possible under a fee-for-service arrangement. The doctor would have felt pressure to pump her through, well, that's not a good word, to get her through in and out of the office as quickly as possible. So there are many benefits to be derived from alternate funding programs, and it's part of the primary health care initiative that we're involved in within the province.
Thank you, Minister. The time allotted for estimates with respect to the Department of Health have expired for today. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that your committee do now rise and report considerable progress and beg leave to sit on a future day.
Chairman of the committee reports.
Progress and begs leave to sit again.
Did agree? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 58, the Mechanics Lien Act?
Bill number 58, the Mechanics Lien Act. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise and speak on, move second reading and speak on behalf of second reading of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this is a very important piece of civil legislation, one that's frankly long overdue in Nova Scotia, where our legislation has lagged behind the equivalent legislation that exists in other Canadian provinces. And this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, I was asked by one member of the press, and on introduction of the bill or the bill briefing with respect to the bill, who wouldn't like the bill? And the only ones that I can think of who won't like this bill, Mr. Speaker, are those people who don't pay their bills. Because fundamentally, those are the only people who are going to be negatively impacted by this bill. And Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of points of this bill that I wanted to just address briefly, and then I'll obviously allow other members of the House to speak to the bill. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, is just simply the renaming of the bill, of the legislation, from the existing Mechanics Lien Act to the Builders Lien Act, which I believe, Mr. Speaker, certainly is a much more accurate description of the legislation than previously existed. Because when you try to talk to clients about, as I have, and I know other members of the House have, about this legislation, and you talk about mechanics liens, they think you're talking about automobile repairs and not necessarily about issues around construction liens. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, is the extension of the period for filing your lien from 45 to 60 days. And again, I know I've dealt with clients, Mr. Speaker, who routinely in the building trades, most people are on 30 days credit, and that seems to be fairly standard these days in many organizations, whether it's the building trades or in fact the furnishing of materials for the buildings trade. People are in 30 days. Well, routinely what would happen is, Mr. Speaker, is that people would get very close to or slightly over the 45 days before it became obvious that somebody was not going to pay their bill. And by that time, Mr. Speaker, it was too late, because after you're over the 45 days, your ability to file a lien disappears. Another provision of this bill, which I think is significant, is the trust provision. And the trust provision has the effect of making sure that in a case of bankruptcy, those funds are available to be distributed amongst the lien holders so that the lien holders are in a position to be paid out of the funds held by the by the builder or contractors. And those provisions, Mr. Speaker, I think are of great significance and will indeed prove the law in Nova Scotia. Another one was sheltering. And sheltering was a very interesting process, and again, it was very technical. It added to great confusion and made it actually very difficult sometimes to determine when liens had been satisfied, because the other side of the coin, of course, Mr. Speaker, from the point of view of the builder, is once the liens have been paid, he wants to get on with the project. And sometimes with the sheltering rules, such as they were, you could be in a situation where there was a question about whether or not a person who had not filed a lien was in a position to shelter or take advantage of a lien themselves. So all in all, Mr. Speaker, and there are other provisions in the bill, but all in all, the general thrust of this legislation is to improve the nature of the protection that exists for those engaged in the building industry, for the benefit of those people who pay their bills, and for the benefit of those people who work for, and in many cases are small business people, working in the construction industry. I should also indicate, Mr. Speaker, that this is based upon work by the Nova Scotia Law Reform Commission, and that the Nova Scotia Law Reform Commission has done a report on this and has done a very good job in outlining some of the issues for the legislation. I should also say, Mr. Speaker, that I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to secure funding, stable funding for the Law Reform Commission for the next 2 years that will enable the Law Reform Commission to continue, and in particular will allow them to engage in a very important project, which is the reform of the civil procedure rules in Nova Scotia. Well, 2 year, and I might add, Mr. Speaker, the reason that the 2-year deadline was chosen was because the court itself is quite concerned that the project move quickly and that it doesn't become bogged down. So that is, again, a project that the Law Reform Commission is engaged in, which I think it will be for the benefit of all Nova Scotians. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, again, I would move second reading, and I would look forward to the support of the honourable members. I know that amongst honourable members opposite, the leader of the official opposition has a great deal of experience in this area, and I believe a great deal of interest in the area, and I look forward to hearing from him and other members of the House who, with respect to the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to stand this evening and talk about the Mechanics' Lien Act. And those people who have been kicking around this House for a little while will know that among some of the first pieces of legislation that I actually brought forward was a draft of the Mechanics' Lien Act. And in fact, I think I brought it forward a number of times as the sessions rolled on. And I can remember every time I would do it, people would say, "What is the Mechanics' Lien Act, and what is it about?" And so I would have to explain it. And then in caucus, you know, every time we would talk about things that we wanted to try and get out of the government, I would always say, the Mechanics' Lien Act, let's get the Mechanics' Lien Act through. And this became a kind of, well, I must say, you know, more than a little bit of a jest around the caucus table, that one of the preoccupations in my political life was the Mechanics' Lien Act. Because for most people, this has nothing to do with the kind of operation of their daily lives. They go on blissfully unaware that the Mechanics' Lien Act even exists. But you know, and when you contrast the Mechanics' Lien Act to things like the insurance issue that we brought forward, or to the long-term care campaign, people would always say to me, where does the Mechanics' Lien Act fit next to the campaign for justice and long-term care? And I would say they are both about justice. They are both about seeing that people are treated fairly. And I have always felt, the minister seems to be indicating that he thinks that that's a bit of a long bow, but you know, I'll tell you, if you have had to go, as I've had to work day in, day out, working for small contractors, working for the men and women who are out there supplying goods to construction sites, those guys who are putting up the drywall, who are putting in the plumbing, and who are just out there with a toolbox trying to make a living every day, only to find that when the construction site, for whatever reason, goes under, and the owners are file for bankruptcy or simply contest the claims, that the only thing that they are going to be entitled to was the amount that was held back, unless they can get more out of the owner. And what would happen, as you might know, Mr. Speaker, is that you go onto a site and you wouldn't actually know necessarily who the owner of the property is. It could be owned by a company in which that could be the one asset that the company has, is that piece of property. They own nothing else, but they own that piece of property. And the developer is developing that piece of property, and you're coming in to work on it in good faith, and they're certifying the advances from the bank on the basis of the progress that's being done on the work that's being done on the site, and that money would get paid out. But it wouldn't necessarily get paid out to the people who were doing work on the site. And we knew of cases, certainly many cases, where oftentimes the developer might be going ahead with 2 or 3 different sites at the same time, and money from one site would be used to satisfy work that was being done on another site. So, it would be very, very difficult to determine exactly where that money was going. So what would happen is there would be a number of claims against the one site. Well, the developer might just walk away from that site. In fact, the bills might far outweigh anything that's going to be gained by paying them off and trying to sell it. So what would happen? The secured lien holder, usually the bank, would come in, and they would end up with the property, and what would happen is all of the other lien holders, with the exception of the 10% holdback, they would all be fighting over that 10%. And if you were a small lien holder, oftentimes when you came into your lawyer, what your lawyer would tell you was, I can file the lien, I can go ahead and try and go through the process with you, but in the end, your amount out of that 10% is going to be less than what you're going to pay me. And there's no other recourse. There's no other recourse for you. And a lot of small contractors, and that's not, they're laughing over there that's because they said I guess I charge too much, but the reality is that I wish that were the case. The reality was that it would be such a small amount that you didn't really recover enough to make it even worthwhile doing. And so a lot of these guys, and when big projects would go down, they could take down some pretty sizable companies with them, let me tell you. And if you remember the hotel out at the airport, if you remember NSC Diesel, if you remember some of the big projects that went down in this province, there was a lot of small contractors and some pretty good size contractors took a pretty big hit as a result of the failure of those projects. And you can imagine some of the frustration, Mr. Speaker, when as a supplier, let's suppose that you supply glass to a project, and if you take one of these projects here in downtown, just the glass alone can be worth a heck of a lot of money. So you come in one day, you deposit the glass on the site because you're the supplier, and the next day the project goes down. You'd think, well, I'm just going to send my truck in there and pick up that glass. No dice. No deal. You've delivered it on the site. It belongs on the site, and you then become a lien holder against that project. And even though it's sitting there, you can't go back in and recover it. Now, that's not to say that from time to time that happened anyway, but I'm just saying that that's not what's supposed to happen. So, people would find themselves in very, very difficult positions, simply because they were caught up in a complex web of rules. The minister mentioned the sheltering rules, which, unless you did mechanics lien work all the time, and even if you did it all the time, you wouldn't necessarily completely understand how the sheltering rules would work in every case. So it was just a mess I agree with the minister that moving on to call this the Builders Lien Act is also a good idea. I think it's more representative of what actually happens. The trust provisions, that's, if you go back and look at the bills, that really all my Mechanics Lien Act bills said from time to time was that money shall be held in trust for the contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers. And I always knew that with the benefit of council and some more resources of government, that they would do a more thorough job than that particular bill, and which they did in this particular Mechanics Lien Act. But what that is meant to do is to tell anyone who's going out to develop a site that the money that you receive that is advanced in respect to that site stays on that site. It's there to pay the contractors, the subcontractors, the suppliers for the work they do. And I think in the end, the Mechanics Lien Act, or now the Builders Lien Act, is about a pretty simple concept for all of us. Everybody out there can understand what it's about, because it's about a very simple rule. You work, you get paid. That's all it's about. That's what the Builders Lien Act was always about. That people who go to work, who go into to work every day and put their skill and put their supplies into working and into constructing the homes, the commercial buildings, the condominiums that people live in. They should be paid for the exercise of that judgment, of that skill, of the advance of that labor against those projects. So, for a long time, I've been here and I guess people may have thought it was funny that you would do this, but I know that there's a lot of people in the construction industry. I know some of them are here who are very happy about the fact that this is going ahead. And dare I say, in the paint store the other night, I had the opportunity to talk to Ms. McCullough, who is here this evening to observe these proceedings. I won't make a formal introduction. Maybe the minister already introduced her before. And we were saying that, there's not everybody in the province who's going to set up at night and think about the Mechanics Lien Act. But we happen to be two of them. Right? Because they are important to a group of people who we have jointly, jointly and severally, to use the legal phrase, have represented over the years, right? All of these small contractors, and when you have a small firm like I worked in, or like I know the Minister of Justice worked in, you essentially do the work that comes through the door. And a small storefront law firm, that's what you do. And many of the people who come through the door are these small contractors. They're the 3 and 4 person firms that are out there, like I said, just to trying to make a living, trying to use the skill that they have and the knowledge that they have to support themselves and their families. And in lots of cases, they grow, they hire other people. I mean, this is what success is about. You gain a reputation as a good tradesperson, as a good contractor, and you grow. So I'm very pleased to see this piece of legislation come forward. I'm pleased, and I remember, and I give some credit here, I remember speaking with a former member here, the former Minister of Economic Development, Gordon Balser, when he was in that position. And I remember asking him about this and him telling me that it was going to be referred off to the Law Reform Commission, which I knew was kind of not necessarily a necessary, but a prudent first step, I would put it that way, in terms of the development of this new section of the Mechanics Lien Act. One thing that was surprising to a lot of people when this piece of legislation came forward was the fact that it binds the Crown. Because for a long time, as people would know, that was just not contemplate it really, that the Crown would agree to be bound by the provisions of an act, and this one does, and I think this is a good thing. This is essentially the Crown accepting its responsibility in these matters as well. The one little piece of disappointment that's in here is that in the smaller claims that they won't be able to go, for example, to small claims court. Still is necessary for you to go to Supreme Court in order to prosecute the lien. And I understand what that's about. That's about jurisdiction. And as the Minister of Justice demonstrates his law school ability to recite the appropriate section, Section 96, and they're known as Section 96 courts. However, I would point out to the Minister that with respect to the Residential Tenancies Act, they use the Small Claims Court to act as a referee for the Supreme Court and kind of get around that necessary provision by that, what I think we would call a legal fiction, and it's but it works, and that in the end, that's what everybody is really concerned about. So I'm not sure if there are many other people who are going to stand and spend much time talking about the Mechanics' Lien Act, and I don't intend to go on any further, Mr. Speaker, because, as I said, it's one of those pieces that not everybody will understand, not everybody will recognize that it will have a profound effect on a lot of people, but it will, and I'm pleased to see it, so I guess with that, I'll take my place, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise as the Justice Critic for the Liberal Caucus and make a few remarks on Bill 58, the Mechanics' Liens Act. And certainly being a member from the Strait area, which has seen a number of large industrial projects in the last number of years, including the major expansion at Stora Enso, which was, I believe, the largest industrial expansion in the history of the province. Certainly this is an important piece of legislation, especially in regards to protecting the many small contractors who work on these large projects and on all other projects, and who work in good faith and expect to be paid at the end of the day for their efforts. Speaker, we're pleased to see that the Law Reform Commission has done so much work on this piece of legislation, and it's certainly an opportunity to remind the Minister of Justice of the important work that the Law Reform Commission does. And I think it's time that we look at long-term funding, not just two-year funding for this commission, and that they no longer have to continue on the roller coaster that they have been on the last number of years of not knowing whether their funding was going to be approved or not, and what level of funding they would be able to achieve. I think we've seen a number of bills come before this House to update our acts and update our laws that we have in this province, and I think it's time that we collectively support the efforts of the Law Reform Commission and allow them to do their work without having to fear for funding every year. Speaker, I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate Carol McCullough and the work that she has done, not only on bringing about these changes, but one of the important things as legislators is to avoid the element of surprise when we arrive here in Province House when legislation is dropped. And I can certainly say that I was pleased that Carol met with myself and I believe a number of other members of this House beforehand to discuss these changes, to seek out support, and to be there to answer questions before the bill arrives here, and that we're left to stand and ask all sorts of questions about the true intent of the bill. So I think it's an example that hopefully other groups will follow. It certainly makes our job as legislators that much easier, and I think it makes us that much more effective, which is always in the best interest of the taxpayers of this province when we can all be collectively effective. So I certainly want to commend Carol, and I'm sure her organization is pleased with the level of work that she has done on their behalf with this. Speaker, I think it's been pointed out that this legislation almost mirrors legislation that's currently in place in Ontario. And I think it's important that we bring our laws, and a lot of work has been done here, and I certainly commend the government for bringing our laws in line with some of the laws in other jurisdictions. And the fact is that when I look at the expansion at Stora Enso, for example, a great deal of the major companies involved were from outside of Nova Scotia. And it makes it that much, it's bad enough when a company is unsuccessful and cannot pay its bills, it's that much more of a challenge to track them down when they're from out of province. That is when the true nightmare really kicks in, and when they do not have any real assets in our province, and you're left with jurisdictional issues and trying to be able to enforce your orders and judgments in other provinces and have to stand in line of what might be actions that are taking place in other provinces. So I think this certainly helps bring about some harmonization in the area. The fact that we are living in a world today where we have companies, especially we've seen in our offshore, coming from all corners of the world to do business here in Nova Scotia. So it's essential that they have a clear understanding of what the rules of engagement are. And I think bringing forward this act, which now will be referred to as the Builders Lien Act, is bringing Nova Scotia up to date with our laws, and especially if we're going to continue to promote the growth of this province and the growth of our economy and the growth of our construction industry, that we clearly have modern day rules applicable in that regard. So with that, again, I'm pleased the government did bring that forward, and I think it did bring it forward, especially with the work by Carol McCullough in securing support from the opposition caucuses prior to doing so. And I look forward to seeing this bill go off to law amendments and any presentations which we may see at that point, and seeing speedy passage coming to this bill. And I commend the Minister for bringing it forward during this session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I too am going to support the bill and the work the department and the Law Reform Commission has done, and the staff of the department in this regard. It's an important thing for small business, because small business has an awfully hard time collecting funds. I remember one time I went to lien a company, and was past the 45 days, so lost the money, and that was it. So you learn the lessons the hard way with some of these things. Unfortunately, it wasn't a big amount, so it really wasn't a major issue for me. There's one thing I'd like to maybe have the Minister consider in this whole process, and I know you've gone through this in detail, and staff, I think, has done an excellent job on it. There's no argument for me at all, as everyone else that's been involved in this. I was wondering if it's possible, when we go through the process, if the lien period could be changed from 60 days to 90 days, just to give a small business time to get their liens in, to make sure that they're not missed out just by a time span. That's the only thing I'd like to see changed in this at this point, and maybe when some of the businesses come in, if they do come into law amendments, they would suggest the same sort of thing. Other than that, I think it's major. I'd like to ask the Minister to sometime let me know why they're removing ships and vessels from the Act as well. That's the only questions I have, and with that, I'd like to again congratulate the Minister and the Department for bringing this positive bill forward.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice be to close debate on Bill number 58. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to rise and close debate on this. And I should begin by closing the debate on second reading by again doing what my colleagues in the House have done, which is to acknowledge the work of Ms. Carol McCullough. Ms. McCullough's work on this bill on behalf of the Construction Association of Nova Scotia, I would suggest is one of the best examples of what an advocate for a piece of legislation can do in making sure that members on all sides of the House appreciate the importance of the legislation, how it will benefit the constituents that we're all trying to serve, and how it will overall effectively assist Nova Scotia business in being competitive in the environment in Nova Scotia and beyond. So I want to congratulate Ms. McCullough, because it really has been a wonderful job. And I consider stalking down the Leader of the Opposition at the paint store a particularly fine job of serendipitous, thank you, the teacher next door, serendipitous work on her behalf. And so I'd like to thank her for that. I should also say that in answer to stand up, please, Carolyn. I would also like to address one of the points that the honourable member for Preston had raised in his comments, and that is the removal of ships. And the reason for that is quite simply, first of all, we have the Personal Property Security Act, which provides a much more effective means of enforcing that security now with respect to liens on what are called personal property, which would include ships and those kinds of things. The second reason was it was never a very effective remedy, and I, by the way, have filed a lien at the land registry against a ship. And it is the most nonsensical thing you can imagine, is to file a lien against an object which by definition is incredibly movable at a land registry which deals with nothing but immovable property. So the reason for doing it was twofold. It wasn't a very effective way to lien the property, and there is now a much more effective way to create security on that under the Personal Property Security Act. So that's the answer to that. I look forward to, I understood his comment with respect to that. And by the way, I do think the 60 days is an improvement, and maybe further improvement is possible. I won't speak at length, but I will tell you that I think all members who've dealt with this will know of when it was 45 days of work being done on the site to do improvements or extra materials being delivered to the site to extend your lien period to get within the period. And my hopes is that whatever lien period that we find will in fact be the lien period, and so that there will be a fairly black line as opposed to having to force people to try to create gray lines in order to take advantage of the legislation. I, like other members, have dealt with the difficulties that small businesses have dealt with in enforcing those liens. And I should also mention that with respect to the I'm going to stop speaking before the government host leader kicks me, but I will say that I have also dealt with situations where the people have had concerns about the size of the lien and enforceability. The Section 96 issue was problematic, but I can tell you that we are hoping to see if there is some possibility for rules in the Supreme Court that may actually assist in making these smaller claims more enforceable. So the matter's not lost on us, and I'm sure it's not lost on Ms. McCullough either. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would close debate and ask for second reading.
For second reading of Bill number 58. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 58, an act to amend Chapter 277 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Mechanics Lien Act.
Will this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, will you please call Bill number 62, the Financial Measures 2004 Act.
Bill number 62, the Financial Measures Act. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I'm pleased to have an opportunity to speak a second reading of this bill. Speaker, this is a comprehensive piece of legislation, and it includes a number of changes of a number of acts, it's a lot of the items that, many of the items that were described in our 2004-2005 budget. Mr. Speaker, this bill deals with the tax changes, and taxes are changes to our brackets to implement the tax changes we announced last week for personal income tax. Mr. Speaker, one of the key elements of this bill is the establishment of the government's first debt retirement fund. Our plan to reduce the debt will be enshrined in this legislation. The plan's three components are establishing a debt retirement contingency in fiscal 04-05, creating a fund for debt retirement using a portion of the interest earned on investments, and enacting legislation that commits ordinary revenues to the province, as well as money from the sale of provincially owned assets to the debt retirement fund. Mr. Speaker, as we announced last week, we are raising the taxes to be paid on unlimited liability companies. We are also changing the tax rate on corporation capital tax. And Mr. Speaker, we are moving that tax by 1% as we defined in the, as we announced last week at the budget. But I think a couple of things, Mr. Speaker, I would like to draw the House's attention to, and one is the labor-sponsored venture capital line. This bill could stimulate investment in Nova Scotia's enterprises. We have proposed amendments to the Equity Tax Credit Act and to the Income Tax Act that would extend the tax credit for labor-sponsored venture capital funds for another 5 years. And we have also proposed eligibility criteria, which should keep more of these investments in Nova Scotia. As a further incentive to invest at home, Mr. Speaker, we are proposing modest increases to the benefits for investors in Labour-sponsored venture capital funds. But also, Mr. Speaker, there are two items here that are related to education measures contained in this Act. We all know we want to serve students with special needs in the public school system. However, we recognize that there are a number of students who may benefit from a short period of time from a specialized expertise of a private school. The provision in the Education Act for school boards to enter into tuition agreements with private schools will continue to exist. It will be entirely at the direction of the school boards whether any of these agreements are made. However, tuition support will be contributed toward the cost of private schools' tuition. The Education Act currently has no provision for this, so we must add this in order to offer this option. Mr. Speaker, the quality education that we all want, quality education for students, and accountability for Nova Scotia taxpayers. We will continue to be the priority as the South Shore, Tri-County, and Strait school boards will move to become regional school board status effective August of '04. As members of this legislature are aware, in 2000, the former Southwest Regional School Board was split into two district boards, the Tri-County and South Shore Pilot District Educational Boards. These district boards shared a regional service provider which was responsible to manage the facilities, transportation, human resources, and providing financial support services. Mr. Speaker, with this bill, the amendments will move these boards back to regional status with responsibility for both education and the facilities. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, there are a number of housekeeping and administrative measures contained in this legislation that are necessary to ensure the ongoing operation of the government of the people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise as the opposition finance critic to address the Financial Measures Act. There's one time every year that we can count on an omnibus bill coming before the legislature, and that's when we see the Financial Measures Act. There's nothing wrong with an omnibus bill in principle, although it can certainly be sadly abused as it has been in other jurisdictions, Mr. Speaker. But what this government does every year, and has done again this year, Mr. Speaker, is put things in the Financial Measures Act that do not belong there. Now, the principle of a Financial Measures Act is supposed to be that it implements all the changes, the statutory changes made necessary by the budget, and that's fine as long as that's what the government has done, but that's not what the government has done. And let me lead off my comments, Mr. Speaker, by noting the sections of this bill that do not belong in the Financial Measures Act. Part 5, the changes to the Education Act, do not belong in the Financial Measures Act. The provisions that are being repealed and amended were enacted in the year 2000 in an act to amend the Education Act. And there was a full and complete debate of what the government was doing at the time. And at the time, this party expressed concerns about the powers the government was taking upon itself and how it was going about this business of taking over the Southwest Regional School Board. Now, if they can do it, if they can enact this stuff in a standalone bill, then why aren't they amending it in a standalone bill? This material does not flow from the budget delivered last week. It is only incidentally related to the province's finances in the sense that pretty much anything the government does has dollar implications, but by the government's logic, we should just be debating one bill in here every year called the Financial Measures Act, and then we can all go home once that bill is through the House. This House needs to have the opportunity to debate fully and completely the kind of changes that are being made in the Southwest Regional School Board. This Part 5 does not belong in the Financial Measures Act. Neither, Mr. Speaker, do all the various changes to the Pension Acts, the Pension Benefits Act, the Public Service Superannuation Act, and the Teachers' Pension Act, because the changes that are being made do not impact on the province's finances. Take, for example, the changes that are being made to the Pension Benefits Act. The Pension Benefits Act doesn't even apply to the Public Service Superannuation Fund. It does not apply. It doesn't apply to the Teachers' Pension Fund. This is a law that applies to all the other pension plans that are out there, not to the province's own pension plans. So what, Mr. Speaker, are amendments to this bill doing in the Financial Measures Act? It does not flow from the budget. So what is it doing here? Also, Mr. Speaker, the portion of this bill dealing with certain amendments to the Public Service Act do not belong in this act. And what am I talking about here, Mr. Speaker? I'll be very precise. On this House's order paper is Bill number 45, which is amendments to the Public Service Act. And what it does to reduce a bill down to a single sentence is it gives the government the power to fire CEOs who aren't doing what the government tells them to do. And that there was a bill briefing in the House, a bill was introduced, there was some debate in the public, but that bill itself has never been called for debate in this House. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? We are never going to see that bill because they've taken the substance of Bill 45 and put it in the Financial Measures Act. Now, it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that what happened on the day that bill was introduced is the government caught wind of the fact that it wasn't going to be as easy a ride as they expected to get that bill passed. There was some fairly critical comments coming from the official opposition, coming from the Liberal Party, and coming from some of the affected individuals, for example, the Nova Scotia School Boards Association. So the government knew clearly that it was going to get a bit of a rough ride, but what have they done then? They've left Bill 45 on the order paper and they put it in the Financial Measures Act. That bill has nothing to do with the budget, and how do we know that, Mr. Speaker? Because it was introduced before the budget. It's already before the House as a standalone bill. It does not flow from the budget. What is it doing in the Financial Measures Act? And as a result of all these things, Mr. Speaker, these provisions of the bill that are not about the government's taxing power, that are not about the government's budget, let me say to the Minister of Finance as clearly as I can, so there's no mistaking our intention on this. We are prepared to pass this Financial Measures Act 2004 through second reading, but we do not make the commitment that we will allow every individual clause from this bill to pass through Committee of the Whole House. Mr. Speaker, those portions of the bill that do not flow from the budget can be taken out if the House deems it appropriate, can be taken out of this bill without it being a matter of confidence in the government, and we will certainly give those provisions the searching examination they deserve. Because, Mr. Speaker, if the government thinks that they can pass controversial stuff not flowing from the budget simply by including it in the Financial Measures Act, they are mistaken. Mr. Speaker, let me move on to one of what you might call the themes of the bill. I'm going to now talk about a number of themes of the bill and how we view these themes. One of the predominant themes in this Financial Measures Act, of course, is user fees and taxes. It certainly takes up the bulk of the bill. Sections 2 through 15, 20 through 23, 29, 33, 34, 48, 49, and 51 all involve in one way or another more and higher user fees, more and higher taxes. Mr. Speaker, a lot of this material in the bill flows from a Supreme Court decision several years ago now called the Eurig decision, E-U-R-I-G. And it kind of changed the legal landscape under which governments are operating. Because what happened in that case was that a particular person was charged a probate fee, a very large probate fee, because in Ontario, where the case arose from, the probate fees were calculated as a percentage of the estate, not by any reference to the cost of service. So the more money involved in the estate, the higher the fee. And so the executor of the Eurig estate ended up paying a fee. I can't remember the precise figure, but it was tens of thousands of dollars, which of course is precisely why it was that kind of fee that got challenged in court, because it was worth their while to pay a lawyer to fight it. And what the Supreme Court of Canada said is simply this: the government cannot charge a tax that is not authorized by the legislature. Very simple, basic principle of our government. No taxation without representation. And what had happened in Ontario is and other provinces, including Nova Scotia, is that this system of probate fees had grown up, but there was no statutory authority to do it. There was no legislation that said, government, you're allowed to charge a probate fee calculated as a percentage of the estate. Because the important thing about that kind of fee, of course, is it is a tax. And the court has a legal test to say, I think it's a three-step test. It's 3 steps or 4 steps, I can't remember. And if it meets every part of the test, then it's a tax, not a fee. Clearly, this percentage probate fee was a tax, and therefore, said the court, it had to be approved by the legislature, and it had not been, therefore it was illegal and had to be refunded. Well, the government has the right to do, the government of Ontario and then the government of Nova Scotia, they simply retroactively legalized the fee. But that's okay up to a point, Mr. Speaker, because the Uric decision is frequently misquoted as standing for propositions it doesn't stand for. But the essential thing it does stand for is there shall be no tax without the approval of the legislature. And if it took retroactive legislation to do it, so be it. At least it had to be looked at, reviewed, examined by the legislature. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that kind of rule flowing from the Uric decision is particularly important in a minority government. Because suddenly now, there is no guarantee that any particular taxing measure of the government will pass with the approval of the House. When the government can command a majority, they can pretty much take for granted that what they propose will be passed by the House. This government no longer has that assurance. And so it's particularly important, I think, Mr. Speaker, that they're operating under the discipline of a decision like Uric. Recently, just late last year, there was a similar decision in New Brunswick, though at the first level of decision-making, not the last level like the Uric decision, finding that the supplier premium charged by the New Brunswick Liquor Corporation was illegal. And we have the same situation here in Nova Scotia, where the Liquor Corporation, I know this is something that has always been a thorn in the side of the Restaurant and Food Association and the members they serve. Their members are the highest volume buyers of liquor products from the Liquor Corporation, but they don't pay less than the rest of us. They pay more. They pay a premium on top of what you and I pay at the liquor store, Mr. Speaker, not to suggest that you go to the liquor store. I don't know if you do or not. But nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, you would expect that high-volume buyers would pay less, but that's not the case. And recently, a court in New Brunswick, basing itself on the Uric decision, said that supplier fee was a tax, had never been authorized by the legislature, and therefore had to stop. The fallout from that New Brunswick decision still needs to be determined here in Nova Scotia because, of course, governments don't immediately jump when a lower court decision is made in another province. They have to work through the process of deciding whether it's likely that a similar decision would be made in this province. But let us remind ourselves that this government has relentlessly, since it was first elected in 1999, raised user fees. The only tax that to this government has been sacrosanct has been income tax. And they appear to have felt, that as long as they left income tax alone, they could claim that they haven't raised taxes. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know just by reviewing the budgets that have been passed every year in this House since they were elected, that many taxes have gone up. Many user fees have gone up. Just in the latest round, over 500. I think the count was 508. This is the government that claims not to have raised taxes, but of course they did, Mr. Speaker. Every single tax line item in the budget, except for income tax, has gone up over the course of this government's stay. as the government, Mr. Speaker. Every single line item except for one. And yet they claim to have, well, up until recently, they claim to have reduced taxes. Of course that wasn't true, Mr. Speaker. Of course it wasn't true. And Nova Scotians know that it's not true. But it's good for a government that has focused on user fees as the way to get the revenue that they need while claiming not to be raising taxes. It's good for them to suffer under the discipline of the Uric decision. This government has now been pressed, and it should be pressed, to justify the user fees that it's charging. And I think, Mr. Speaker, the government has only begun to hear from people affected by those user fees who will ask the government, demand from the government, an accounting for how much revenue is raised by every fee and a justification in comparison to the cost of service. Now, in the Uric decision, the Supreme Court of Canada says it doesn't have to be a precise calculation because by its nature, it's difficult to calculate the cost of collecting a particular fee. But it has to be at least approximately equal. Otherwise, the government has to come back to this House, declare it to be a tax, and pass it through this House as a tax. And that, Mr. Speaker, explains a great deal of what's in this year's Financial Measures Act. Is line after line after line, the government is finally admitting that many of these fees are in fact taxes. They are not justified by the cost of service. There is no reason for all of these things to be in the Financial Measures Act otherwise. They know that on the Uric test, the fees fail. And so they have to finally admit that they're taxes. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, this government should be pressed to justify further, and they will be. And I certainly, and I know other members of the Public Accounts Committee, look forward to the appearance of the Deputy Minister of Treasury and Policy Board before the Public Accounts Committee on May 5th to discuss this very subject of user fees. Mr. Speaker, another theme on which I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the Financial Measures Act are all the changes to the Education Act. I've already explained, Mr. Speaker, why these provisions do not belong in this Act. They were enacted as a standalone Act. They should be amended as a standalone Act. They do not belong in the Financial Measures Act. The Southwest Regional School Board in the year 2000 was made the involuntary subject of a so-called pilot project whereby it was divided into two smaller boards and then certain subject matters were put under the administration, the direct administration of the Department of Education, and the elected school boards had jurisdiction over a much smaller subset of the issues that are looked after, for example, by the Halifax Regional School Board right here, which governs my constituency, which still has control of governance over the full range of education issues. Mr. Speaker, it's possible that I haven't been paying attention, but I haven't seen the government declare the results of the pilot project. I haven't seen a study from them saying, here's what, and that's what a pilot project is supposed to be, a test case. Saying, there should be a study saying, here's what we've done, here's what worked and why, here's what didn't work and why, here's why we think that this should be continued or how it should be changed, here's how we think that these concepts are transferable or not transferable to other school boards in the province. It's possible, Mr. Speaker, that I haven't been paying attention, but I haven't seen that document. The first I saw of this was a news release issued by the government late last week, simply announcing these changes that we now find in the Financial Measures Act. Where's the study? Where's the community consultation? How do we know in this House that this is the right way to go, Mr. Speaker? And I was disappointed to see that one community member, one, I believe, school board member on one of these elected school boards had said that their school board is opposed to going the direction of the government and that they weren't consulted on the direction that the government's going. I think we need to hear more, Mr. Speaker. We need, at the Law Amendments Committee and outside the Law Amendments Committee and otherwise, to hear from the affected communities to say, is this the way you want to go, and if not, why not? But the government, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest deliberately is putting a roadblock in the way of that kind of consultation or that kind of meaningful dialogue and debate by putting these measures in the Financial Measures Act where they do not belong. Now, Mr. Speaker, kudos where kudos are due. There is another part of the Education Act changes that are wonderful, excellent, and that is the changes to the way that special needs students are going to be governed in this province. I won't say a lot more about it because I know my colleague, the education critic for the opposition, will have more to say. I know other colleagues over the course of the debate will have more to say about this. But I would say that in my brief time as an MLA, a little over 3 years, two of the most difficult constituency cases I've ever had have involved precisely this subject. Special needs students who cannot fit into the regular school system, and they desperately want alternative tuition agreements. And in one case, Mr. Speaker, well, in both cases they were denied because the Halifax Regional School Board theoretically allows these tuition agreements, but in practice says no to all of them. And this was particularly difficult in one case, Mr. Speaker. One of the cases was a family that wanted a new tuition agreement, and they said no to that family. But the really difficult one was a family where the child already had a special tuition agreement and had it for 5 years, all the way through junior high, grade 10, grade 11, could not function in the regular school system, was going to graduate from the St. Thomas Aquinas Center over in Dartmouth, and in his last year, grade 12, guess what? The regional school board yanked the tuition agreement, said no more. That child was on the verge of graduating, Mr. Speaker. And do you know what the family did? They kept him at the St. Thomas Aquinas Center without funding. The St. Thomas Aquinas Center kept educating that child because they are so committed to doing what they're doing, and it works. And I'm very glad to see provisions, even if they're in the Financial Measures Act, Mr. Speaker, where they don't belong. Mr. Speaker, why on earth are we going to be debating special needs education in the context of the Financial Measures Act? It doesn't belong there, but nevertheless, it's there, it's a good thing, but like everything else, all the sort of bare bones powers that the government gives itself, the powers are good because change is needed. Change is fundamentally needed, but the real test is not the powers the government's giving itself, it's how the government is going to use them. Mr. Speaker, I want to move on very briefly to Part 8 of the Act, which is the MLA pay raise. And there's something very important I think I need to say about this, Mr. Speaker. This bill says that the pay raise recommended by Mr. Donohoe will not be implemented. But what I don't think is widely known, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to put on the record here, is that the fact that that pay increase, that too large pay increase, was not going to be implemented was already the subject of an all-party agreement. All three parties had agreed that that pay increase could not, should not, would not be implemented. And right up until the day this House met and the Premier announced that it would not be implemented, the opposition parties were being led to believe that that decision was going to be announced and implemented in a different way. But what happened, Mr. Speaker, is on the first day of this House, the Premier announced it as if it was his idea and his idea alone. And uncharacteristically, I must say, Mr. Speaker, the Premier did not acknowledge at any time that not implementing the pay increase was already the subject of an all-party agreement, because it appears, no, I shouldn't go there, Mr. Speaker. That's imputing motive. The effect of what the Premier did was to imply that it was his decision and his decision alone, Mr. Speaker, and I think that did a disservice to this House, Mr. Speaker. Let me move on then, Mr. Speaker, to my next theme, which is the changes to the Income Tax Act. Certainly there are aspects of the Income Tax Act rollback, or the Income Tax Cut rollback, that we think are good. And we particularly like the fact that the rollback is being done in a progressive way, not across the board, because that's not fair. This government has relentlessly raised regressive taxes and user fees, which hit people at the lower end of the income scale harder than people at the upper end. And so when it came time to give the reward to Nova Scotians, it was on those regressive taxes and those user fees that we should have seen the reward, so that the people that were punished most by this government got the biggest reward. But that didn't happen. The government instead chose to deliver the reward through the income tax system, so that the people who had been paying relatively the least over the life of the government were getting the most back. And it's good to see that when it came time to roll back the tax cut, the government did it in a progressive way so that people at the lower end of the tax cut scale kept their tax cut, while people at the upper end are not only having it rolled back, but they're paying a little bit more. That's fair. That's reasonable. One other point worth noting about this tax cut rollback, though, Mr. Speaker, is that by rolling it back only for people at the upper end of the income scale, the government has taken back between $90 and $100 million. So now we finally know the real story about who it was that was going to benefit from that income tax cut. Mr. Speaker, by taking it away from people only at the upper end, the government is getting back 2/3 of the tax cut. So it's clear now, that's where the money was going. Mr. Speaker, we did ask the question earlier today about military personnel. The government said in the budget speech that military personnel were going to get a break in the provincial tax that was the same as the break recently announced on federal tax. And we were puzzled, Mr. Speaker, when we read the Financial Measures Act and didn't actually see anything there. Because members may or may not be aware that there have been some changes at the federal level. And to be specific, Mr. Speaker, in the original federal proposal, soldiers serving in Bosnia and Haiti were excluded from the tax break. They've now been included. And we wanted to make sure that the same changes had been made on the provincial level. After meeting with staff that were made available by the minister at my request, we've now established to our satisfaction that because of the way the Provincial Income Tax Act is worded, that precisely the same personnel who will get the provincial benefit will also get, who will get the federal benefit will also get the provincial benefit. Mr. Speaker, let me move on then to the pension changes, which is another theme in this act. It appears in several places. Now, there is something in Part 12 that I'll just signal to the minister as some concern. I think we need more information. Pension matters are always difficult, but a particular kind of benefit called a grow-in benefit is being eliminated. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think in order for the House to debate this provision knowledgeably, we need to have more information from the government. Who's the winner here? Who's the loser? Who gets to decide? Who is lobbying for this? Have the government's pension partners been consulted? What's the reaction of the people, the admittedly few people in the province, Mr. Speaker, who understand pension matters inside out? This is one of those provisions, Mr. Speaker, that I said does not belong in the Financial Measures Act. And one of the reasons it doesn't belong, well, it's not just because it doesn't flow from the budget. It's because in order for this House to debate knowledgeably and vote knowledgeably on complicated matters like pensions, we need to hear from people with the expertise. A category of benefits is being eliminated from all pensions governed by the Nova Scotia Pension Benefits Act, and I dare say, Mr. Speaker, that there are not many people in this House who understand the implications of that. And that, Mr. Speaker, is also a disservice to the House. Similarly, the pension changes that are being made to the Public Service Superannuation Act and the Teachers Benefit Act, there's no question that these changes are being made for the benefit of the very highest income earners under those pension plans, Mr. Speaker. If I understand the information I received correctly, Mr. Speaker, these changes affect only people who stand to get a pension, Mr. Speaker, not income, but who stand to get a pension of more than $105,000 a year. A pension of more than $105,000 a year. And some changes are being made to benefit those people. And it's being made retroactive, not 1 year, not 2 years, not 3 years, but 4 years, So they must have particular individuals in mind. And I think before the House can vote knowledgeably on these kind of matters, we need to have more information. The explanatory notes offered by the Department of Finance when the bill was introduced are not adequate to address such complex and technical matters as pension benefits.
Order, please. Would the honourable member like to move adjournment debate, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the government House Leader has some routine business to transact, and on that note, I would move that debate be adjourned.
Motion to adjourn debate. Is it agreed? The honourable government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call the order of business private and local bills for second reading?
Private and local bills for second reading.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 54, the St. Peter's Evangelical Lutheran Church Act?
Bill number 54. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor of moving that bill for second reading.
Motion is for second reading Bill 54. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 54, an act to amend Chapter 35 of the Acts of 1881, an act to incorporate the St. Peter's Evangelical Lutheran Church of Chester, Lunenburg County.
Order this bill referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. The honourable member, the honourable government House Leader.
Please call Bill number 55, the Lenahan Municipality of the District of Chester Retiring Allowance Act.
Bill number 55.
Mr. Speaker, I'd take the honor of moving that bill 55 for second reading as well.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 55. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 55, an act to authorize the municipality of the District of Chester to provide a retiring allowance for Barry Linehan.
Order this bill referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. The honourable government House Leader.
Speaker, please call Bill number 56, the Nova Scotia Federation of Anglers and Hunters Act.
Bill number 56. The honourable member Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to move this for second reading. And having said that, I've been asked by the Federation of Anglers and Hunters if I could possibly state for the record that the Nova Scotia Federation of Anglers and Hunters was established in 1930 by concerned resident sports people in Nova Scotia. Originally known as the Nova Scotia Fish and Game Protection Association, they were enacted under Chapter 148, 1930 Nova Scotia Legislature, and the mission statement of the Nova Scotia Federation of Anglers and Hunters is this, Mr. Speaker, and I know that you respect and appreciate the good work of the Nova Scotia Federation of Anglers and Hunters. Their mission statement quickly is, in respect of the late hour, the Nova Scotia Federation of Anglers and Hunters is dedicated to the conservation and propagation of the wildlife in the province of Nova Scotia for those who hunt, fish, trap, or otherwise wish to enjoy the wildlife resources of Nova Scotia. This will be accomplished by education, cooperation, and exchange of information with all people, and by uniting provincial organizations having similar objectives. And, Mr. Speaker, I so move. Thank you.
Motion is for second reading of Bill 56. The House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 56, an act to amend Chapter 148 of the Acts of 1930, an act to incorporate the Nova Scotia Fish and Game Protective Association and County or District Fish and Game Associations.
This bill refer to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. The honourable government House Leader.
Please call Bill number 60, the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company.
Bill number 60, the honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this bill be now read a second time.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 60. The House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Clerk.
Already read the title. 60?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bill number 60, an act to amend Chapter 87 of the Acts of 1915, an act respecting the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company, and Chapter 105 of the Acts of 1981, an act to confer additional powers upon the Antigonish Farmers Mutual Fire Insurance Company.
This bill referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. Call upon the honourable House Leader for the official opposition for tomorrow's hours and order of business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow the hours will be from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And after the orders of the day, we will be calling Bill number 52, which is a road improvements bill, and resolution number 1098, which is with regard to post-secondary education. I move adjournment of the House.
Motion is the House adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? All in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The House adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow.